Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. Here is the rewritten version, expanded in simple, natural English while keeping the original event and feeling intact. I've posted this story elsewhere before, but even after all these years, it is still one of the most frightening things that has ever happened to me. It happened back in the 1970s, when I was much younger and hitchhiking was something people did more often without thinking twice about it. I know that sounds different now. These days, most people would probably tell you never to get into a stranger's car, and I understand why. But at the time, I was trying to get home, I did not have much money, and hitchhiking felt normal enough. I had spent the day away from home and was working my way back by taking rides whenever I could get them. Most of the day had gone fine. A few people had stopped for me, and each ride got me a little closer. I was grateful for every mile because I was tired and wanted nothing more than to get home, eat something, and sleep in my own bed. By the time the last person dropped me off, though, I still had around 20 miles left to go. The driver had taken me as far as he was heading. He let me out on a long country road and wished me luck before driving away. I remember standing there for a moment, watching his taillights disappear into the dark. At first, I was annoyed more than anything else. 20 miles is a long way when you are walking, especially after spending a whole day on the road. Still, I thought I might get lucky. Another car could come along, someone might be heading in my direction. I had no better plan, so I started walking. The road was the kind of road that feels different after dark. There were no streetlights. There were no houses close by. There were no stores, gas stations, porches, or windows glowing in the distance. It was just a narrow stretch of pavement going forward into the night, with cornfields on both sides. During the day, I am sure it would have looked ordinary. It might even have looked peaceful. But at night, the fields seemed endless. The corn stood tall along the roadside, making dark walls on both sides of me. There was very little moonlight that night. I could see enough to stay on the road, but not enough to see far ahead. The sky was dark, and the road faded into blackness in front of me. Behind me was the same thing. I could not see where I had come from once I had walked a little way. It felt like I was moving through a tunnel, except the tunnel was made of darkness and rows of corn. At first, the only sound was my own walking. My shoes hit the pavement in a steady rhythm, step after step after step. Since there were no cars around and no wind moving through the fields, my footsteps sounded louder than they should have. There was a strange echo to them. Not a real echo, exactly, because there was nowhere for sound to bounce back from. But the road was so quiet that every step seemed to come back to me somehow. I remember thinking that my footsteps sounded odd. I slowed down a little and listened. Then, I stopped. For a second, everything was quiet. Then I heard something walking inside the corn. It was not right next to me, but it was close enough that I could tell it was keeping pace with me. I stood completely still, and the sound stopped too. That was the first moment I felt real fear. At first, I tried to explain it away. I told myself it could be an animal. There were plenty of animals in that area. It could have been a deer moving through the field. It could have been a dog. It could have been something small, maybe a raccoon or some other animal that I could not see. But even as I thought those things, none of them made me feel better. The sound had not been a random rustling. It had not been the quick movement of a small animal. It had sounded like footsteps, slow, steady footsteps. Something had been moving when I was moving, and when I stopped, it stopped. I stood there staring into the corn, but I could not see anything. The plants were tall and thick, and the darkness between the rows looked solid. I tried to focus my eyes. I tried to catch even the smallest sign of movement. Nothing showed itself. There were no eyes shining back at me. No shape. No sound. Just the road, the fields, and the feeling that I was not alone. I started walking again. Almost immediately, the sound in the corn started too. One step from me. One step from it. I walked faster. It walked faster. The sound was still hidden inside the field, still blocked by the rows of corn, but it was keeping right alongside me. I could hear the plants brushing and bending as it moved. My heart started pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I kept telling myself not to panic. I told myself that I was imagining things, but my body did not believe me. I broke into a run. The thing in the corn ran too. That was when the fear became something else. It was no longer just nervousness. It was no longer a strange feeling I could laugh off later. I knew there was something moving through the field beside me, and it was matching me. Every time my shoes slapped the pavement, I heard movement in the corn. Fast movement. Heavy movement. It sounded like something was forcing its way through the rows, pushing the stalks aside as it ran. I ran harder. The road stretched ahead of me with no light anywhere. I could not see a car coming. I could not see a farmhouse. I could not see any place to hide or get help. All I could see was the black road in front of me and the dark corn on both sides. I knew I could not keep running for 20 miles. I was already tired from the day, and I knew that if I exhausted myself, I would be even more helpless. Then I had an idea. It was not a good plan, but it was the only thing I could think of. I suddenly turned around and ran in the opposite direction. I did not slow down or stop first. I spun around as quickly as I could and started running back the way I had come. The movement in the corn stopped. For 1 second, there was nothing. Then I heard it turn. The sound came again, moving in the same direction I was moving now. It began running through the corn beside me, turning around just as fast as I had. Then it suddenly stopped again. I stopped too. The silence that followed felt worse than the sound. I stood there in the middle of the road, breathing hard, trying not to make any noise. I could feel sweat running down my back, even though the night air was cool. I kept looking toward the corn, but it was impossible to see through it. The field was like a wall. Whatever was in there could see the road. It could hear me. It knew exactly where I was. Then I realized something that made my stomach drop. It had stopped when it was beside me, not behind me, not ahead of me, beside me. It had matched my turn. It had matched my run. And when I stopped, it had stopped at the same place. I ran again. This time, I did not even think about it. I just ran. I ran forward, and then, after a few seconds, I turned around again as fast as I could. The thing ran. Then it turned too. I could hear it moving through the corn as if it was following the line of the road. It was not wandering. It was not running away from me. It was staying close. I could hear the stalks snapping and shifting. I could hear something heavy brushing past them. The sound rose and fell with my own speed. I looked toward the top of the cornfield as I ran. That was when I saw it. The tops of the corn were moving. Not much at first, just a narrow line of stalks shaking and bending in a way that did not look like wind. There was no wind. The night was still, yet the corn was moving in a path beside the road, following me. I could not see the body of whatever was causing it. The stalks were too tall, and the darkness was too thick. But I could see the tops shifting as it moved. It was close enough that I could trace its path. That was the point where I stopped thinking it was a normal animal. I cannot say for certain what it was. I never saw it clearly. I never saw a face. I never saw fur, clothes, hands, or anything else that would have explained it. But I could tell from the way it moved that it was on two legs. It did not sound like a deer. A deer might run beside a road for a moment, but it would not stop when I stopped. It would not turn around when I turned around. It would not keep pace with me over and over again. This thing seemed to understand what I was doing. It seemed to be testing me, copying me, or watching me. The worst part was that it never came out of the corn. If it had stepped onto the road, maybe I could have seen what it was. Maybe I could have known whether it was a person, an animal, or something else. But it stayed hidden. It stayed just out of sight, close enough for me to hear and feel, but never close enough for me to understand. By then, my mind was racing through every possibility. I lived in an area where people talked about Bigfoot sightings. Most of the time, I did not put much thought into those stories. They were the kind of local tales people repeated around campfires or when they wanted to scare someone. But standing on that road in the dark, hearing something walk and run beside me in the corn, I remembered every story I had ever heard. I also thought about the insane asylum in the area. Again, I do not know what made me think of it. Fear can pull every bad idea out of your mind at once. I started wondering if it was a person. Maybe someone dangerous had gotten out. Maybe someone was hiding in the corn. Maybe they were following me because they knew I was alone. That thought was almost worse than the idea of Bigfoot, because at least an animal would not understand what it was doing to me. I was terrified of stopping, but I was also terrified of running until I collapsed. I kept looking down the road, hoping for headlights. Every few seconds, I would turn my head and stare into the darkness ahead. Nothing, just black pavement and black sky. I kept moving because standing still felt impossible. Then, in the distance, I saw a faint glow. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I blinked and looked again. The light grew stronger. It was headlights. I do not remember deciding to move into the road. I just did it. I stepped out toward the middle of the pavement and started waving both arms as hard as I could. I was not thinking about whether the driver would be afraid of me. I was not thinking about whether they might keep going. I only knew that I needed that car to stop. The headlights came closer. I waved harder. For a moment, I was afraid the driver would pass me. I imagined the car rushing by, leaving me standing there with the road empty again and the thing still hidden in the corn. But the vehicle slowed down. Then it stopped. I ran to the passenger side before I even had time to think. I pulled the door open and jumped inside. I must have looked completely terrified because I remember the people in the car asking me what was wrong. I do not know how much sense I made when I tried to explain. My chest was tight, and I could barely catch my breath. I probably sounded wild. I told them something had been following me in the field. I told them it had been running beside me. I told them I needed to get out of there. I kept looking out the window as the car pulled away. I expected to see something step out from the corn. I expected to see a shape standing at the edge of the road, watching the car leave. But I saw nothing. The field was dark and still again. The corn stood there like it had never moved at all. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made the whole thing worse. For years afterward, I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was a person. Maybe fear made the sounds seem more organized than they really were. Maybe the corn had moved because of a breeze I could not feel. Maybe the road made everything sound strange. I have gone through every possible answer in my mind. But there are parts of it I cannot explain away. I cannot explain why it stopped when I stopped. I cannot explain why it turned when I turned. I cannot explain why it ran when I ran. I cannot explain the way the tops of the corn moved beside me in that straight, steady line. Most of all, I cannot explain the feeling that whatever it was knew I was there and was choosing to stay hidden. I am old now, and I have had plenty of frightening moments in my life. I have been in bad situations. I have heard strange noises in empty houses. I have been caught outside in storms. I have driven through dangerous weather and traveled through places where I should have been more careful. But I have never been as scared as I was on that road. There is a kind of fear that comes from seeing danger clearly. You see a person with a weapon, a car coming too fast, a fire spreading, or a wild animal standing in front of you. That fear is terrible, but at least you know what you are afraid of. What happened to me was different. I never saw it. I only heard it. I felt it keeping pace with me. I watched the corn move above it. I knew something was there, just a few feet away on the other side of those stalks, and I knew it could have come out whenever it wanted. That is what stayed with me. Even now, I can close my eyes and picture that road. I can see the darkness ahead and behind me. I can hear my shoes hitting the pavement. I can hear the other footsteps in the corn. I can feel that sudden sick fear when I realized the thing was not simply moving through the field. It was following me. And to this day, I still do not know what it was. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I went sledding with a friend on a very dark winter afternoon. Where I lived, winter days could get dark early. The sky would turn gray before it was even close to evening, and by late afternoon it often felt like nighttime was already coming. The snow made everything look bright in some places, but the trees, hills, and empty spaces between houses always seemed darker than normal. That day was like that. The sky was heavy and dull, with thick clouds covering most of the light. The snow on the ground had been packed down in places from people walking and sledding, while other parts were still soft and untouched. The air was cold enough to make your face sting, but not cold enough to stop us from wanting to be outside. At that age, snow days and winter afternoons felt like freedom. You did not think much about danger. You thought about finding the steepest hill, seeing who could go the fastest, and trying to stay outside as long as possible before your hands got too cold. My friend and I had probably been talking about sleds, school, or something unimportant. I do not remember every detail of the day, but I remember the hill. It was one of the better sledding hills in the area. It was steep enough to be exciting, but not so steep that adults would immediately tell kids not to go near it. At the top, you could see down across the snowy slope, and at the bottom there was enough open space to slow down. There were trees around parts of the hill, but the center was mostly open. It was the kind of place kids naturally gathered during the winter. That afternoon, though, it was not crowded. I do not remember seeing many other people around. Maybe there were a few kids farther away, or maybe we had simply arrived at a quiet time. Either way, it was mostly just me and my friend, our sleds, the cold air, and the long white hill in front of us. At first, everything was normal. We went down the hill a few times, climbed back up, laughed when one of us fell into the snow, and did the usual things kids do when they are outside in winter. My boots kept filling with snow. My gloves were damp. My nose was running from the cold. But none of that mattered, because we were having fun. I remember the feeling of climbing back up the hill after a fast ride down. Your legs would burn through your snow pants, your breath would come out in white clouds, and you would be half tired but still excited to do it again. The hill looked different from the top. You could see the tracks made by the sleds, thin lines cutting down through the snow. At some point, we were near the top of the hill, getting ready to go down again. That was when we heard barking. At first, it sounded far away. I do not remember which one of us noticed it first. Maybe my friend looked up. Maybe I heard the noise and turned automatically. But the barking was loud enough that it made both of us stop what we were doing. We looked toward the top of the hill. That was when we saw them. Two dogs were running toward us. They were huge, not just large in the way a normal big dog can look big to a child. These dogs seemed enormous. They were black, heavy-looking, and fast. At that age, I could not have told you exactly what breed they were. They may have been some kind of large working dog, hunting dog, or guard dog, but to me, they looked like monsters coming down the hill. Their bodies were low and powerful as they ran. Their mouths were open. They were barking hard. The sound echoed across the snowy hill. I remember seeing their dark shapes against the white snow and feeling panic hit me instantly. There was no slow moment where I tried to figure out whether they were friendly. I did not stop to think that maybe they belonged to someone nearby. All I knew was that two giant black dogs were racing straight at us, barking as loud as they could. I turned and started running downhill. I do not even remember making the decision. My body just moved. I grabbed my sled or dropped it. I honestly cannot remember which. I only remember trying to get away from the dogs as fast as I could. Running down a snowy hill is hard enough when you are not scared. Your feet slide, your legs sink, and every step feels unstable. But when you are terrified, you do not care if you fall. You just run. I ran down the hill, slipping and stumbling through the snow. Then I looked back. My friend had not moved. He was still standing there near the top of the hill. He had completely frozen. I could see it in the way he stood. His body was stiff, his arms were close to his sides, and he was staring at the dogs as they got closer. I screamed for him to run. I yelled his name. I told him to follow me. But he did not move. He looked terrified. I had never seen anyone freeze like that before. I knew people could get scared, but I had always assumed that if something dangerous happened, everyone would run. I thought fear automatically made you move. But my friend could not. The dogs were getting closer. I remember looking between him and the dogs, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to go back and pull him with me, but I was scared too. I was only 9 or 10. I did not know how to fight off two huge dogs. I did not have anything to protect us with. I did not know whether they were going to bite him, knock him down, or turn toward me next. I shouted again, "Run!" Still nothing. The dogs were almost on him. I could hear their barking clearly now. It was not playful barking. It sounded angry, sharp, and loud. Their paws kicked snow behind them as they ran. I remember thinking they were going to reach him before he could even react. Then someone shouted. The voice came from the top of the hill. It was loud, deep, and commanding. I do not remember the exact words. It may have been the dogs' names, or maybe the man yelled for them to stop. But whatever he said, the dogs reacted immediately. They stopped right in front of my friend. Not a few feet away. Not after running past him. Right in front of him. The sudden stop made snow spray around their paws. They were close enough that my friend could have reached out and touched them if he had been able to move. He was still frozen. The dog stood there, barking less now, watching him. Then a man began walking down from the top of the hill. I had not seen him before. That was strange because I had looked toward the top of the hill when I first heard the barking. I had only noticed the dogs. But now there was a man making his way down through the snow, moving carefully, but quickly. He looked serious. He was dressed for the weather with heavy boots and winter clothes. I do not remember exactly what he was wearing, only that he looked like an adult who knew what he was doing. He did not seem panicked. He seemed in control. When he reached the dogs, he grabbed both of them by their collars. That was when I realized how large they really were. Even with the man holding them, they looked powerful. Their bodies were tense, and their breath came out in clouds in the cold air. The man asked us if we were okay. I remember nodding because I did not know what else to do. My friend was still shaken. He looked pale and scared, but he was not hurt. The dogs had not bitten him. They had not knocked him down. They had stopped at the last possible moment. The man looked at us for a second, then told us to go home immediately. Not later. Not after one more sled ride. Immediately, his voice made it clear that he was not joking. My friend and I did not argue. We grabbed our things and headed home. I remember walking away quickly, looking back more than once. The man was still standing there with the two black dogs, holding them near the top of the hill. They were no longer running at us, but I could still hear them making low sounds. For the rest of the walk home, my friend and I barely talked. We were too scared. The whole thing had happened so fast. 1 minute, we were sledding. The next minute, two massive dogs were charging at us. My friend was frozen in terror, and a stranger had appeared from the top of the hill to stop them. At home, I told my mother what happened. I expected her to be angry that I had been out sledding somewhere dangerous. I expected her to tell me I should not have been near dogs I did not know. But when I explained what had happened, she looked more worried than angry. She asked where the man had come from. I told her he had been at the top of the hill with the dogs. She asked whether I recognized him. I did not. She asked whether the dogs had bitten us. They had not. She asked whether the man had said anything else. I told her he had only asked if we were okay, and then told us to go home. At the time, I did not understand why she seemed so concerned. Later, I learned why the man had been there with those dogs. Apparently, he was part of a group of people trying to find a murderer who had reportedly been seen near the area. In our small town, that was a huge deal. People talked about it everywhere. Adults talked in kitchens and on front porches. People mentioned it at stores. Parents warned their children to be careful. Rumors spread fast, especially because the area was small and quiet enough that something like that felt impossible. The idea that a murderer might be nearby made everyone nervous. It was not like living in a city, where you might hear about crimes on the news and feel distant from them. In a small town, when someone says a dangerous person has been seen near your area, it feels close. It feels personal. You start wondering whether they have been near your house, near your school, or near places where children play. The man with the dogs was apparently part of a group searching the area. I do not know if they were official volunteers, local hunters, or just people trying to help look. I do not know whether the dogs were trained for tracking or whether they were simply large dogs that came with him. But the fact that they were on the hill because people were looking for someone dangerous changed the entire memory for me. At the time, I had only thought the dogs were coming after us. Later, I started wondering whether they had smelled something. Maybe they had picked up a scent from the hill. Maybe they were running ahead because they were tracking someone. Maybe they were excited because they were trained to search. Maybe they saw us and simply got worked up because we were nearby. I do not know. But after hearing about the search, the whole thing felt much more frightening. The man had told us to go home immediately because we were kids out in an area where there were rumors of someone dangerous nearby. That made sense. What did not make sense was why my mother had let me go outside in the first place. I do not blame her now, because I know adults cannot always protect children from every rumor or danger. And I now know that the criminal had already been caught by the police before the incident happened. But at the time, nobody seemed to know that for sure. The rumors were still spreading. People were still worried. And my friend and I were out sledding on a hill near the woods while a man and two giant dogs were walking around searching the area. Even now, when I think about it, I wonder how close we were to something worse. Maybe the man and dogs had only been out there because someone wanted to be cautious. Maybe they were searching after the danger had already passed. Maybe the dogs were simply too excited, and the man had lost control of them for a few seconds. Maybe none of it had anything to do with the murderer at all. But as a kid, I did not know any of that. All I knew was that two huge black dogs came running down the hill at us, barking like they wanted to tear us apart. I knew my friend could not move. I knew I was screaming for him to run. And I knew that the dogs stopped just inches from him when a man shouted from the top of the hill. That moment stayed with me more than almost anything else from childhood. The image of my friend standing completely still, the dogs racing down through the snow, the dark sky above us, the white hill beneath our boots, the sound of barking getting louder and louder. Then, the sudden silence when they stopped. I think about how differently it could have gone. What if the man had been farther away? What if he had not seen us? What if his dogs had not listened? What if my friend had fallen instead of freezing? What if the rumors had been true and the person everyone was looking for had actually been nearby? I do not know. Maybe I was never in real danger. Maybe the dogs only wanted to investigate us. Maybe they were trained and would never have hurt anyone. Maybe the man had control the entire time and knew he could stop them. But when you are 9 or 10 years old, you do not think that way. You only see two huge black animals running at you through the snow. You only hear your friend not responding when you tell him to run. And you only feel the terror of realizing that for a few seconds, there is no adult close enough to help. The man did help us. He got the dogs under control. He made sure we were okay. He told us to go home. I never forgot that. But I also never forgot how quickly a normal winter afternoon turned into one of the scariest moments of my life. Even now, whenever I see two large dogs running towards someone, I think about that hill. I think about the dark winter sky. I think about my friend frozen in place. And I remember the sound of that stranger shouting from above us just before the dogs stopped. My grandfather asked me to go into his basement to get his ginger ale out of the fridge next to his handmade bar. I was 12 years old at the time, so it was not a big deal. I had been in his basement before. It was familiar enough, even if it had the usual old basement feeling that made everything seem a little colder and quieter than the rest of the house. It was one of those basements that felt lived in, not abandoned or empty. There were things stored along the walls, older furniture, tools, boxes, and the kind of family items that collect over decades. But the main thing down there was the bar. My grandfather loved that bar, even though by then he did not use it the way he once had. It was handmade, and even at 12, I could tell it was not just some cheap basement setup. It had real character. The wood was beautiful, darker and warmer than the rest of the basement. and the whole thing looked like someone had spent a lot of time making sure every piece fit right. The bar had one long side that ran across part of the basement, then wrapped around toward another wall. Beyond that area, there was a small section where my uncle slept. It was partly separated from the bar area, not exactly a full room in the way upstairs bedrooms are, but enough that he had his own space. There was a curtain or divider that gave him some privacy. The fridge was positioned next to the bar. The way the fridge door opened made it so that when you leaned down or reached inside, the door blocked your view of the bar itself. You could be standing right there, right next to it, and not see whether anyone was sitting on the other side. That detail matters because when I first went downstairs, I did not see anyone. I walked down the steps, crossed the basement, and went straight to the fridge. Nothing seemed unusual. I was only thinking about getting my grandfather's ginger ale and going back upstairs. The basement was quiet, but that was normal. The air had that cool, slightly dusty basement smell. The kind that mixes old wood, concrete, and whatever has been stored there for years. The light was dimmer than upstairs, but not so dark that I could not see. I opened the fridge, leaned in, found the ginger ale, and grabbed it. The fridge door blocked my view of the bar while I did this. I pulled out the pop, closed the fridge, and straightened back up. That was when I saw someone sitting at the bar. At first, I was not scared. My uncle often sat down there at the bar. He had a habit of hanging around in the basement, and sometimes he would sit there like he was running a real bar. There was an open-close sign down there, and he would turn it to open whenever he was sitting at the bar. It was one of those little family things that felt normal because we were used to it. So when I saw a person sitting there, I assumed it was him. I remember holding the ginger ale and looking over at the figure at the bar. He was sitting there like he had every right to be there, like he had been there the whole time, drinking quietly. I called my uncle's name. I expected him to turn around, say something stupid, maybe joke about being open for business, or ask why I was staring at him. But the person at the bar was not my uncle. He stood up. That was when I realized he was taller than my uncle. Not by a huge amount, but enough that my brain immediately noticed something was wrong. He was also dressed nothing like him. My uncle usually wore jerseys, fitted caps, and sneakers. That was his style. Casual, modern, the kind of clothes I was used to seeing him in every day. This man was wearing a cowboy hat. He had silver hair. He had on a white tank top, bootcut jeans, and cowboy boots. It was such a specific outfit that for a second, I thought it had to be some kind of joke. I thought maybe my uncle had dressed up for some reason. Maybe he had found old clothes. Maybe there was a story behind it. Maybe he was messing with me. The man did not answer when I called my uncle's name. He just looked at me. Then he tipped his hat. It was not dramatic. It was not threatening. It was a calm, casual gesture, like someone acknowledging me politely before leaving. Then he turned and walked toward the area where my uncle slept. I stood there for a second, still holding the ginger ale. I was confused more than anything. The outfit was so different from anything my uncle normally wore that I wanted to see what was going on. I thought honestly that he had somehow found the coolest old cowboy outfit ever. I was curious. I wanted to ask him where he got it, why he was wearing it, and why he had not said anything when I called his name. So I followed him. I walked over toward the area where my uncle slept and pulled back the curtain. His bed was empty. The room was clean, exactly like it usually was. There was no cowboy, no boots, no hat, no silver-haired man, no uncle. Nothing. For a moment, I just stood there, staring into the empty space. My brain tried to make sense of it. The man had walked in that direction only seconds earlier. There was nowhere else he could have gone without me seeing him. He had not passed me. He had not gone back toward the stairs. He had not stepped behind the bar. He had walked straight toward the sleeping area, and when I looked inside, there was nobody there. That was when the chill hit me. It was immediate. 1 second, I was confused and curious. The next, my entire body went cold. It felt like all the air had left the basement at once. I suddenly became very aware of how far I was from the stairs and how quiet everything was. I did not want to keep looking. I did not want to turn around and see him sitting at the bar again. I did not want to check behind anything. I did not want to call out. I just wanted to get upstairs. I pulled the curtain back into place, turned around, and hurried toward the stairs. I was moving so fast that I shook my grandfather's ginger ale without even realizing it. By the time I reached the stairs, I was almost running. I climbed up as quickly as I could, gripping the bottle or can in my hand, my heart pounding so hard that I could hear it. When I got back upstairs, my grandfather looked at me and immediately noticed something was wrong. I must have been pale. I must have looked terrified. He started making fun of me at first, the way grandparents do when they think a kid has scared himself over nothing. He joked like I had seen a ghost. But then I told him what happened. I explained exactly what I had seen. I told him I went to the basement for his ginger ale. I told him I opened the fridge, grabbed it, closed the door, and saw someone sitting at the bar. I told him I thought it was my uncle. I told him I called my uncle's name and that the man stood up. Then I described him. A little taller than my uncle. Cowboy hat, silver hair, white tank top, bootcut jeans, cowboy boots. I told him the man tipped his hat and walked toward where my uncle slept. I told him I followed and looked behind the curtain, but nobody was there. My grandfather's expression changed. At first I thought he was going to get serious because he believed someone had broken into the basement. I thought maybe he would go down and check, or maybe he would call someone. But that was not the look on his face. His expression brightened, not like he was happy in a silly way, more like something had touched him deeply. His eyes changed, and for a moment he looked like he was about to cry. That reaction confused me almost as much as seeing the man had. I expected fear. I expected disbelief. I expected him to tell me I was imagining things. Instead, he looked emotional. Then he explained. That bar had been built by his best friend about 40 years earlier. I was 12 when this happened, and I am 26 now. My grandfather was 66 then, and he is 80 now. The man he told me about had been part of his life for a very long time before I was even born. They had done everything together. They had been the kind of friends who were more like brothers. They spent time together, drank together, worked on things together, and knew each other in the way only long-term friends can. My grandfather did not talk about him like he was just someone he used to know. He talked about him like he was part of his history. And that friend had built the bar, not bought it, not helped install it, built it by hand. He had made everything himself, from the leather stitching to the beautiful woodwork. My grandfather said his friend had put real care into it. Every part of the bar had been touched by him in some way. The wood, the finish, the details, the shape of it, all of it had come from his hands. He gave it to my grandfather as a gift because they both loved to drink. That was why the bar meant so much. It was not just a piece of furniture in the basement. It was a memory. It was a whole part of my grandfather's life that had been preserved in wood, leather, and old stories. Then my grandfather told me his friend had died. He passed away after falling during a hike and being exposed to the elements. I do not know every detail, and I have never pushed my grandfather too hard for them, because even years later, I could tell it was painful for him. But I know the death affected him deeply. After his friend died, my grandfather quit drinking. But he kept the bar. He kept it for his friend's sake. The bar remained in the basement, not because he used it the way he once had, but because getting rid of it would have been like throwing away a piece of his best friend. It was a reminder of the life they had shared and the person he had lost. As he told me all of this, I started to feel the fear shift into something else. I was still shaken. I still could not explain how a man could be sitting at the bar 1 second and gone the next. But the way my grandfather reacted made the experience feel less like a haunting and more like a visit. He asked me again what the man looked like. I described him the same way. The cowboy hat, the silver hair, the white tank top, the bootcut jeans, the cowboy boots. My grandfather listened carefully, and the more I described him, the more emotional he became. It was him. That was what I understood from my grandfather's face before he even said it clearly. The man I had seen was not my uncle in a costume. He was not a stranger. He was not someone who had broken into the basement. He was my grandfather's old friend, the man who had built that bar, the man who had once sat and drank there with him, the man who had been gone for years. I did not know what to say. At 12 years old, I did not have the words for something like that. Part of me still wanted to be scared, because seeing someone disappear in your grandfather's basement is terrifying no matter who they are. But another part of me understood that my grandfather was not afraid. He looked almost grateful. That made the whole thing stranger. It was like I had seen something that was not meant to scare me, but to comfort him. After we talked, we went back down, or at least checked the bar. I remember noticing the sign. The open-close sign was turned to open. That was the same thing my uncle sometimes did when he sat there, but this time it felt different. I had seen the man sitting there like the bar was open for him. Then there was the shot glass. It was his friend's favorite shot glass. It was turned upside down on the bar. Written on it in marker were the words, "Drink up, bud." That detail stuck with me, because it felt too personal, too specific. A random ghost story would have been one thing. A strange figure in a basement, a cowboy hat, a disappearing man. But the sign being on open and that shot glass sitting there turned upside down made it feel connected to something real, something that had history. Something that belonged to the relationship between my grandfather and his friend. I do not know whether the shot glass had been like that before I went down. I do not know if my grandfather had left it that way. I do not know whether my uncle had moved it at some point. But in that moment, after everything I had just seen and everything my grandfather had just told me, it felt like the bar had been used. Not by a living person, but by someone who still knew it was there. I thought about the way the man had tipped his hat. That was the part that replayed in my head the most afterward. He had not threatened me. He had not tried to scare me. He had not spoken. He had simply stood up, acknowledged me, and left. Like he had been caught in a private moment and did not mind that I had seen him. Or maybe like he knew I was supposed to see him. For a while after that, I did not want to go into the basement alone. Even though my grandfather's reaction had made the experience feel less dangerous, I was still 12. I still had to live with the fact that I had seen a dead man sitting at a basement bar. Whenever I went near the stairs, I would think about him. I would imagine the fridge door opening, blocking my view of the bar, and then closing again to reveal someone sitting there. I would imagine a cowboy hat in the corner of my vision. I would imagine hearing boots on the basement floor. Sometimes, if I had to go down there for something, I would look at the bar first. I would check the stools. I would check the sign. I would check the space near the curtain where my uncle slept. Most of the time, nothing was there. The basement was just a basement. The bar was just a bar. But it never felt completely ordinary to me again. As I got older, I thought about the story differently. At 12, I focused on the ghost part. I saw a man who should not have been there. I followed him, and he vanished. That was terrifying. As an adult, I think more about my grandfather. I think about him losing his best friend. I think about him keeping that bar for decades because it was made by someone he loved. I think about him quitting drinking after his friend died, but still preserving the place where they had shared so many memories. And I think about the look on his face when I told him what I saw. It was not the expression of a man dismissing a child's imagination. It was the expression of someone who had just been handed a message from the past. I have tried to come up with explanations. Maybe I saw my uncle and my mind changed the details later. But that does not fit. My uncle's style was completely different. He wore jerseys, fitted caps, and sneakers. The man I saw had silver hair, a cowboy hat, a white tank top, bootcut jeans, and cowboy boots. Maybe someone else was in the basement, but there was nowhere for him to go. I saw him walk toward my uncle's sleeping area, and when I pulled back the curtain, it was empty. The room was clean. The bed was empty. There was no one hiding there. No sound of anyone leaving. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. Maybe at 12, with the fridge door blocking my view, I saw shadows at the bar and turned them into a person. But I remember him standing. I remember the hat tip. I remember the movement toward the back. I remember the instant chill when I found nobody there. I remember shaking the ginger ale all the way up the stairs because my hands would not stop trembling. And I remember my grandfather's reaction. That is the part that makes me believe it was more than a trick of the eye. I had no idea who his friend was. I did not know the story of the bar. I did not know what the man looked like. I did not know what clothes he wore. I was not expecting to see anyone in that basement, except maybe my uncle. Yet the person I described meant something to my grandfather immediately. I still do not know why I saw him. Maybe he came back because of the bar. Maybe he was there often, sitting where he used to sit, with the sign turned to open and his favorite shot glass nearby. Maybe he wanted my grandfather to know he had not really left. Maybe he knew a child would be less likely to dismiss what he saw. Or maybe it was just one of those moments where the past and present overlap for a few seconds, and someone living accidentally sees someone who should only exist in memory. I am 26 now, and my grandfather is 80. The story has stayed with me all these years. I still remember the basement. I still remember the fridge door blocking my view. I still remember closing it and seeing someone sitting at the bar like it was the most normal thing in the world. And I still remember the man with silver hair and a cowboy hat standing up, tipping his hat to me, and walking away into a room where no one was there. If it was a ghost, it was not an angry one. It was not there to hurt me. It was just the man sitting at the bar he built for his best friend, taking one more quiet moment in a place that still remembered him. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. My husband and I were driving north on Route 1, somewhere past Point Reyes, and heading up toward Elk. It was late, around 11 at night, and the road was almost completely empty. There had not been another car in front of us for a long time. No headlights coming toward us, no taillights disappearing ahead, No houses close to the road with porch lights glowing in the distance. Just the narrow, winding highway, the dark trees, and the sound of our car moving through the night. That part of the coast is beautiful during the day. The road follows the edge of the land, climbing and turning through forests, open fields, cliffs, and small, quiet towns. But at night, especially when you are far from anything familiar, it feels completely different. The darkness is not like the darkness in a city or suburb. There are no streetlights. There are no buildings close enough to throw light across the road. The headlights only show you the small piece of pavement directly in front of the car, then everything beyond that disappears into blackness. The trees were especially dark that night. On one side of the road, there were wooded areas where the forest seemed to begin immediately past the shoulder. You could see the first few trunks when our headlights passed over them, then nothing behind them. The rest of the forest was just a wall of black. On the other side were stretches of land that dropped away into darkness, with occasional glimpses of open sky between turns. But even the sky was almost invisible. There were clouds overhead, or maybe just no moon, because there was very little light anywhere. We were not driving fast. Route 1 curves constantly in that area. It is turn after turn, blind corner after blind corner, the road folding around hills and through stands of trees. You cannot relax into a straight stretch and let your mind drift. You have to pay attention, even when there is no other traffic. My husband was driving, and I was looking out the window from time to time, watching the road disappear beneath the headlights. We were listening to music, not cheerful music. It was some slow, heavy drone rock. The kind of music that feels like it is made of distant guitar feedback, low humming sounds, and long empty spaces between notes. It was not loud, but it filled the car with this dark, dragging mood. Normally, I like that kind of music. It fits long drives. It makes the road feel cinematic. But that night, it did not help. The music made the silence outside feel even larger. It made every turn feel lonelier. There was something about being in that car, late at night, moving through a completely empty stretch of road with those low sounds playing, that made me aware of how isolated we were. Still, nothing felt wrong. Not at first. We were just driving. I remember looking out at the trees on the left side of the road as we passed a wooded area. I was not staring at anything in particular. It was more of a casual glance, the kind you make when the road is dark and your eyes move between the windshield, the side windows, and the mirrors without really focusing. Then, something flashed at the edge of my vision. It was so sudden that I almost missed it. At first, I thought it was a pale branch catching the headlights. Then I realized it was moving. I turned my head slightly, then looked up into the rearview mirror. That was when I saw him. A naked man was running out of the trees and into the road behind us. For a second, I could not understand what I was looking at. The road behind us was briefly lit by the fading reach of our headlights and whatever light reflected off the pavement. Against all that darkness, his body stood out with a horrible clarity. His skin looked pale in the headlights, almost white against the black forest behind him. He was running toward the road, waving both arms over his head. Not like someone waving hello, not like someone trying to flag down a ride in a normal situation. He looked frantic. He looked terrified. His arms were moving wildly, and his entire body seemed tense with panic. He was running after our car, or at least trying to get our attention as we drove away from him. I remember seeing his face only for a second. It was enough. He looked completely crazed, but not in a way that made me think he was trying to hurt us. He looked like someone who had just run out of somewhere he should not have been. Someone who was desperate for help. Someone who had been chased. Someone who had escaped something and did not know what else to do. I made some kind of sound. I do not even know whether I said a word or just gasped. My husband looked over at me, confused, and I said, "There's someone back there." I kept staring into the rearview mirror. The man was getting smaller immediately because we were still moving forward. We had already passed the wooded area. The road turned again, and within seconds he was nearly out of view. But I could still see him. He was standing or running in the road behind us, waving at our disappearing car. Then the road curved, and he was gone. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The music kept playing. That low, heavy sound continued through the car as though nothing had happened. My husband asked what I saw. I told him. "A naked man," I said. He ran out of the woods. He was waving at us. He looked in the mirror, but by then there was nothing to see. The road behind us was empty. No headlights, no figure, no movement, no sound except the tires on the pavement and the music coming through the speakers. At first, I wondered whether I had somehow imagined it. Maybe the darkness had made me see something wrong. Maybe I had seen a branch or a piece of pale bark. Maybe the headlights had caught a deer standing on its back legs somehow, though that did not make sense. Maybe I was tired and the music had put me into a strange mood. But I knew what I had seen. It was a man. He was naked. He had come running out of the forest. And he had been waving at us. My husband did not dismiss me. He had not seen it clearly himself, but he could tell from my voice that I was not joking. I was not laughing. I was not trying to tell him some weird roadside story for entertainment. I was genuinely shaken. We kept driving for a few more seconds, trying to process it. Then my husband said we should turn around. At first, I did not answer. Part of me wanted to keep going. I did not want to go back to the trees. I did not want to stop on that road. I did not want to find out what had happened to the man. I did not want to see him again. But another part of me knew that we could not just leave. What if he was hurt? What if someone had attacked him? What if he had been in an accident? What if he was running from someone in the woods? What if he had needed help, and we were the only car that had come by all night? The road had been empty for so long that it was hard to imagine anyone else coming soon. We had to at least look. So my husband found a place where he could safely turn around. It took longer than it should have, because Route 1 is not the kind of road where you can simply stop and turn back whenever you want. There were curves, narrow shoulders, trees close to the pavement, and not much room to pull off. By the time we turned around, maybe 20 seconds had passed. Maybe a little more. It did not feel like much time. We had not driven miles away. We had not stopped for a long conversation. We had only passed the area, realized what we had seen, tried to understand it, then turned the car around. As we headed back, the mood in the car changed completely. The music was still playing, but now it felt unbearable. The slow, droning sounds no longer seemed atmospheric. They seemed wrong. They made the drive back feel like we were moving towards something we should not be returning to. Neither of us said much. I kept watching the road ahead. Every curve felt longer. Every stretch of trees looked darker. I expected to see the man standing in the road. I expected to see him waving again. I expected him to be lying injured on the pavement. I expected to see another car stop nearby, maybe someone trying to help him. But there was nothing. We reached the place where I thought I had seen him come out of the woods. No one was there. The road was empty. There was no clothing on the ground. No shoes. No bag. No car pulled over. No signs of an accident. No person standing at the edge of the trees. We slowed down. My husband looked toward the forest. I looked too. The trees were dense and dark. The forest began only a few feet from the road, but beyond the first row of trunks, it was impossible to see anything. There were bushes, branches, fallen leaves, and shadows everywhere. If a person had walked back into the woods, we would not have been able to see them. If someone had been hiding there, we would not have known. If something had happened just beyond the tree line, it could have been 10 feet away from us and completely invisible. We drove slowly past the spot. I kept expecting to see movement, a hand, a face, a pale shape between the trees. Anything, but there was nothing. No sound either. No yelling, no running footsteps, no branches breaking, no voice calling for help. That was what bothered me most. A person who had been running after a car only moments earlier should have still been nearby. Even if he had gone back into the forest, we should have heard something. He had been frantic. He had been waving both arms. He had looked terrified. Then, less than a minute later, there was nothing. It was as if he had never been there. My husband pulled over farther down the road, somewhere that felt a little safer. We sat there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. Should we call the police? Should we drive back again? Should we get out and look? The idea of getting out of the car was immediately terrifying. The road was completely empty. The woods were dark. There were no houses nearby. No lights. No safe place to go. If the man had been running from another person, we had no idea whether that person was still there. And if the man himself was unstable or dangerous, we had no idea what he might do if we stepped out of the car. We were not prepared. We had no flashlight powerful enough to search the woods. We had no weapons. We had no signal certainty. We were just two people in a car on a rural road in the middle of the night. Eventually, we decided not to get out. I do not remember whether we called anyone. I think we may have debated it, but we did not know exactly where we were. We only knew we were somewhere north of Point Reyes, heading toward Elk, on a stretch of road that had no obvious landmarks. I remember looking down at my phone and wondering whether there was any point in trying to explain what we had seen. What would we say? We saw a naked man run out of the woods and wave at our car, but when we turned around, he was gone. It sounded unbelievable. And there was no evidence. No body, no car, no clothes, no name. No exact location beyond a dark curve on Route 1. We eventually kept driving, but the entire mood of the trip had changed. For the rest of the drive, I could not stop looking into the rearview mirror. Every time the headlights swept across trees, I expected to see someone standing between them. Every time we rounded a curve, I expected a figure to be in the road. Every glimpse of pale pavement or fog made my heart jump. The music had been turned down by then, or maybe we turned it off completely. I do not remember exactly. I only remember that the car felt too quiet afterward. My husband tried to talk through possible explanations. Maybe the man had been drunk. Maybe he had been on drugs. Maybe he had been part of a group camping in the woods. Maybe there had been a party somewhere nearby, and he had run out onto the road in a panic for some reason. Maybe he had been having a mental health crisis. Maybe he had been injured and frightened, then hidden when he saw us turn around. All of those things were possible. But none of them explained why he had disappeared so quickly. If he had been drunk or confused, where did he go? If he had been injured, why was there no sign of him? If he had been running from someone, why did we not see anyone else? If he had been camping or partying, where were the cars? Where were the lights? Where were the other people? There was nothing around us. That stretch of road had felt empty before we saw him, and it felt even emptier afterward. The more I thought about it, the worse I felt. He had not looked angry. He had not looked like someone trying to scare us. He looked like someone who needed help. That is why the memory stays with me. There are strange things you see on roads at night that you can eventually laugh about. A deer standing in the headlights. Someone in a costume. A drunk person doing something ridiculous. a shadow that turns out to be a sign or a tree stump. But this did not feel like that. The man's fear looked real. The way he waved at us looked desperate. And because we had already passed him before I fully understood what I was seeing, I will always wonder whether we were too late. Sometimes I think about the possibility that he was running from something in the woods. Maybe another person. Maybe someone who had hurt him. Maybe someone who had forced him to run without clothes. Maybe he had escaped from a vehicle or a house somewhere off the road. Maybe he had been trying to get someone, anyone, to stop. That thought makes me feel sick. Because we did turn around. We tried to find him. But by the time we got back, there was no trace. It feels like we may have witnessed someone's last chance to be seen. Maybe he ran back into the trees because he heard something coming. Maybe someone pulled him away from the road. Maybe he hid because he thought we were a threat. Maybe he never wanted help at all. Maybe he was not even real in the way we understood reality. I know that last thought sounds extreme, and I do not actually know what I believe. I am not saying we saw a ghost. I am not saying it was some kind of supernatural thing. But there is something about seeing a person in a place where there should be no one, then returning almost immediately and finding absolutely nothing that makes your mind go places it normally would not. Especially in the dark. Especially on a road like Route 1. Especially with a black forest behind him and no other car for miles. The part I remember most clearly is the contrast, the pale shape of his body against the darkness, the way his arms were raised, the look on his face, the road behind us shrinking in the rearview mirror as he tried to get our attention. He was so visible for those few seconds that it almost felt impossible for him to vanish afterward. But he did, or at least by the time we returned, he was gone. We never found out what happened to him. We never saw him again. We never heard anything that explained it. No news story, no report. No mention from anyone else that there had been a man running naked along that stretch of road that night. Maybe there was an explanation. There probably was. But not knowing is what makes it stay with me. Every time I think about it, I get the same awful feeling. The feeling that he was not running toward us. He was running away from something. And that whatever he was running from was still in those woods when we turned around. A few years ago, I was out at a bar with some friends. It was a normal night at first. We were drinking, talking, singing karaoke, laughing at each other's song choices, and doing all the usual things people do when they go out with friends. Nothing about the night stood out while it was happening. It was loud, crowded, and messy in the ordinary way bars are late at night. Someone had probably picked terrible songs. Someone had probably taken karaoke too seriously. There were drinks on the table, people shouting over the music, strangers cheering for singers they did not know, and that weird sense of confidence everyone seems to get after midnight in a place full of loud music and alcohol. By the time the bar started closing, it was around 2 in the morning. I lived only 4 blocks away, so there was no need to get a ride. It was close enough to walk, and a few of my friends were planning to stay at my place anyway. We had done the same thing before after nights out. We would walk back together, keep talking the whole way, get inside, drink water, sit around for a while, and eventually pass out wherever there was room. The streets were quieter when we left the bar. The nightlife noise faded quickly once we were away from the entrance. Behind us, there were still people standing around, calling rides, saying goodbye, arguing about where to go next, or trying to finish conversations they had been having inside. But as we got farther down the street, the noise thinned out. It was late enough that most windows were dark. The sidewalks were mostly empty. Streetlights threw pale circles over the pavement, and the air had that strange early morning stillness where the night feels almost finished, but the day has not started yet. We were walking and talking. I do not remember exactly what we were discussing. It could have been something stupid that happened at the bar. It could have been a karaoke song. It could have been plans for the next day. I remember voices around me, the sound of people's shoes on the sidewalk, and the feeling that I was with my friends. Then, everything changed. There was no warning, no strange sound, no feeling that something was about to happen. One moment, I was walking with my friends. The next moment, I was completely alone. At first, I did not understand it. I remember looking around and expecting to see everyone still beside me. I thought maybe they had crossed the street, stopped behind me, or turned down a side path without me noticing. But there was no one there. The street was empty. There were no voices, no footsteps, no sound of anyone laughing or calling my name. It was like the entire group had disappeared. Then I noticed the light. A bright spotlight was shining directly on me. My first thought was that it had to be the police. That was the only thing that made any sense. Maybe a patrol car had pulled up behind me. Maybe I had done something wrong without realizing it. Maybe someone had called about people leaving the bar. I do not know why I jumped to that conclusion, but when a bright light suddenly hits you in the middle of an empty street, your mind tries to find the most normal explanation available. I turned toward the light, but I could not see where it was coming from. It was too bright. At first, it looked like a strong beam from a vehicle or a street light. Then it grew more intense. It spread around me, whitening the pavement, the buildings, and everything in my line of sight. It did not seem to come from one clear direction anymore. It felt like the light was surrounding me. I remember squinting. I remember trying to raise a hand to block it. I remember looking down the street for my friends and seeing absolutely nothing. The light kept getting brighter, not suddenly, like a flash. Slowly, steadily, it grew until it became difficult to see anything beyond it. The street disappeared. The buildings disappeared. The sidewalk disappeared. I could not see my friends. I could not see a police car. I could not see any person at all. I only remember standing there, confused and disoriented, with that light becoming more intense around me. After that, my memory is not clear. There is no normal sequence of events I can follow. I do not remember walking home. I do not remember saying goodbye to anyone. I do not remember unlocking my building, going upstairs, opening my apartment door, or getting into bed. There is just a blank space. Then I woke up. Or at least, that is the closest word I have for it. I came to lying on my back outside, on the awning area connected to my apartment. At the time, I lived on the 4th floor. The awning was not a place you could simply walk onto from the street or reach from a normal outside staircase. The only way I knew to get there was through my actual apartment. You had to be inside the building, inside my unit, and then somehow access that space from there. I was lying flat on my back. The sky was beginning to brighten. It was not fully morning yet, but the sun was starting to rise. The blackness of night had softened into that pale gray blue color before sunrise. The city was still quiet, but there were small signs that the day was beginning. A distant car, a bird somewhere nearby, the faint hum of traffic farther away. For a few seconds, I did not move. I was trying to understand where I was. My body felt strange. I was not in sharp pain, but I felt heavy and drained, like I had not slept properly. My mind was slow. I remember staring upward and trying to figure out why I was outside. Then I noticed lights in the sky to my left. They were blinking. At first, I thought they might be aircraft lights, maybe a plane moving through the distance, maybe a helicopter, maybe some kind of drone. But the shape of them did not look right. They appeared to form a disc-like pattern. The lights were arranged in a way that made them look like they belonged to one object. I could not see a clear, solid body because the sky was still dim and the lights were far enough away, but I could see the pattern. They were not moving like normal lights. I slowly sat up. The blinking lights shifted. Then they began moving in a circle, not drifting casually, not following a straight path. They moved in a deliberate circular motion in the sky, like something was rotating or changing direction around a point. I watched them for what felt like several seconds. I remember being too shocked to make sense of it. I was still trying to understand how I had gotten onto the awning. I was still missing time. I was still thinking about the bright light on the street. And then there were these lights moving in a way that did not feel normal. Then they shot upward. It happened fast. They moved into the atmosphere so quickly that they were gone almost immediately. There was no slow climb, no gradual fading, no sound of an engine that I could hear. 1 second, they were in view. The next, they were high above me, and then gone. I sat there for a while. I do not know how long. I was scared, but I was also trying very hard to find a normal explanation. Maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe I was seeing aircraft lights through exhaustion and alcohol. Maybe there had been a helicopter or drone that looked strange because of the angle. Maybe I had somehow dreamed part of it. But none of that explained why I was on the awning. I eventually went back inside. I was relieved to find my apartment the way I expected it to be. My friends were there. They had stayed the night, just as planned. Seeing them made me feel more grounded for a moment, because it proved that at least part of the night had happened normally. I told them what had happened. I told them that we had been walking back from the bar, that I remembered being alone under a bright light, and that I woke up outside on the awning as the sun came up. I told them about the lights in the sky. I asked what had happened earlier, when we left the bar. I expected them to say we had gotten separated. Maybe I had walked off. Maybe they had gone ahead and assumed I was behind them. Maybe I had taken a different route. But their answer was worse than I expected. They said I had been walking with them normally at first. Then, all of a sudden, my eyes turned white. That was how they described it. They said my eyes did not look normal. They said it was like I was staring through them instead of looking at them. They said I started talking in a strange way, using a voice or manner of speaking they did not recognize. They could not understand what I was saying. They said it did not sound like me. Then, according to them, I suddenly took off running. Not walking quickly, not stumbling away. Running, I ran toward the tree line. Apparently, there was a wooded area nearby, and I headed straight for it. They said they called after me, but I did not respond. They said I kept going, as if I either could not hear them or did not care that they were behind me. Then, they made a choice that still confuses me. They went home. They assumed I was just being belligerent. We had been drinking, and they thought I was acting strange because of alcohol. Maybe they thought I wanted to be alone. Maybe they assumed I would find my own way home later. Maybe they were tired and did not understand how serious the situation was. I do not blame them entirely. At the time, they had no reason to think anything supernatural or dangerous was happening. From their point of view, I was drunk, acting weird, and running off toward the trees. They may have thought I would calm down and come back. They may have thought I knew the area well enough to get home safely. But hearing that story made me feel sick. I had no memory of my eyes turning white. I had no memory of speaking strangely. I had no memory of running toward a tree line. And I had no memory of how I ended up on an awning outside my fourth-floor apartment. The more I thought about it, the more disturbing it became. There was a stretch of time missing from my memory, and other people had seen me behaving in a way they did not recognize. I tried to laugh it off. I tried to say, maybe I had just gotten too drunk. Maybe I had blacked out. Maybe the bright light was a street light or police car that I remembered incorrectly. Maybe I had found some strange way onto the awning after coming home, and I had no memory because I was intoxicated. But even that explanation did not sit right with me. I had been drinking, yes, but I did not normally black out like that. I did not normally run off into the woods. I did not normally speak in strange voices or do things that made my friends say they did not recognize me. And I still could not figure out how I got outside on that awning. Later that day, I was still creeped out. I had spent the morning replaying everything in my head. The bar, the walk, the sudden loneliness, the spotlight, the lights in the sky, my friends describing my eyes and voice, the blank space in my memory. I was trying to calm down by doing normal things. At some point, I got into the shower. The hot water was running, and I was probably hoping that being alone for a few minutes would help me feel more normal. I looked down at my arm and noticed something strange on my bicep. There was a slit. It looked like a small cut or narrow incision. It was not deep enough that blood was pouring out, but it was noticeable. It looked too clean to be a random scrape. Around it or beneath it, I could feel a lump inside my arm. The lump felt firm. It was not like a bruise. It was not like a normal swollen area after hitting something. It felt like there was something under the skin that did not belong there. My first thought was that it was a spider bite. That seemed more reasonable than anything else. Maybe I had been bitten while I was outside. Maybe the area had swollen. Maybe the slit was a scratch I had not noticed. But I could not stop touching it. The cut was there. The lump was there. And I had no memory of getting either one. I went to the doctor. I did not know how much of the full story to tell them. I probably sounded ridiculous enough just describing the spot on my arm. I may have mentioned that I noticed a cut and swelling. I may have said I thought it was a bite or some kind of infection. The doctor examined my arm. They looked at the place where I had seen the slit. They felt around the bicep, where I had felt the lump. Then they told me there was nothing there. I thought they had misunderstood. I pointed to the exact spot. I told them there had been a cut. I told them I had felt a lump under my skin. But when I looked down again, the slit was gone, not healing. Gone, there was no mark, no scab, no redness, no sign that the skin had been cut. The lump was gone too. I pressed around the area again and again, trying to find it. Nothing. The place where I had been sure there was something felt normal. The doctor could not find anything because there was nothing there to find. That was the moment when the whole experience stopped feeling like a weird night out and started feeling impossible. A bright light on an empty street. A gap in my memory. Friends saying I acted unlike myself. Waking up somewhere I did not understand how to access. Strange lights moving in the sky. A slit in my arm that vanished before a doctor could see it. I know how all of that sounds. I know there are normal explanations for parts of it. Alcohol can affect memory. Stress can distort what you remember. Bright lights can look strange at night. People can misread someone's behavior when they have been drinking. A small scratch can look worse in a shower or disappear when water washes away dried blood. A swollen muscle or insect bite can go down quickly. Maybe I had slept in an awkward position and imagined the lump. Maybe I was exhausted, frightened, and looking for patterns. I understand all of that. But even now, I cannot fully explain it. The biggest thing I cannot explain is the missing time. I cannot explain why I was alone when I had been walking with friends. I cannot explain why I was on that awning. I cannot explain what my friends meant when they said my eyes turned white and I started speaking in a way they did not recognize. I cannot explain why I ran toward the trees. And I cannot explain why I remember a spotlight growing brighter and brighter until the rest of the world disappeared. I do not know what happened that night. I do not know whether it was a blackout, a strange dream-like state, a panic reaction, or something else entirely. I do not know whether the lights I saw were anything unusual or whether they were simply normal things made frightening by exhaustion and confusion. I do not know whether the cut and lump were real in the way I remember them, or whether I was so rattled that I misread what I saw on my own arm. But I know the feeling that stayed with me afterward. It was not just fear. It was the feeling that something had happened to me while I was not fully there to experience it. That is what still gives me chills, not the disc-shaped lights, not even the strange mark on my arm. It is the idea that I was walking down a familiar street with people I trusted, and then suddenly I was alone beneath a light I could not explain. After that, there is only darkness in my memory. And when I woke up, the night was nearly over. I was about 7 years old when this happened. I was staying at one of my aunt's houses with my family, along with my cousins and siblings. It was supposed to be a normal family visit, the kind of day where adults talked inside while all the kids ran around outside until someone eventually called us in for food. My aunt lived on a property that had a large backyard opening out toward farmland. There was plenty of space to play, and when you were a kid, it felt enormous. There were patches of grass, uneven ground, trees around parts of the property, and open space that seemed to stretch much farther than the yards I was used to. The part of the house I remember most clearly was the massive balcony or raised platform overlooking the backyard. It was high enough that you could stand on it and look down across the whole property. I do not remember exactly how tall it was, but it was far higher than a normal porch. What made it even more dangerous was that it had no railings. There was nothing protecting anyone from walking too close to the edge. Looking back now, I cannot understand how children were allowed near it so easily. But when you are 7 years old, you do not think about falling. You do not look at a high platform and imagine broken bones or death. You see it as another place to play. You see the edge as somewhere exciting to stand, because it gives you a better view of everything below. That afternoon, the weather was bright and warm. It was the middle of the day. The sun was high enough that the backyard was fully lit. There were no strange shadows from nighttime. No storm, no rain, no darkness outside. It was one of those clear afternoons where everything should have felt safe. My cousins, my siblings, and I were all playing in the yard. I do not remember exactly what game we were playing. It could have been tag, hide and seek, or one of those made-up games children invent and forget by the next day. I only remember the feeling of running around outside with everyone else, laughing, shouting, and not paying attention to much beyond whatever game we had decided was important. There were people everywhere at first. My cousins were nearby. My siblings were somewhere in the yard. Maybe some of the adults were watching from inside or standing around talking. It was loud in the ordinary way a family gathering is loud. Kids yelling, people calling each other's names, someone laughing, doors opening and closing, distant voices drifting from inside the house. Then something changed. I do not remember deciding to leave the other kids. I do not remember walking away from them. I do not remember climbing onto the balcony or platform. But somehow, I suddenly found myself alone. I was standing right at the edge of that high platform, looking down into the backyard below. The yard that had been full of people only moments earlier seemed empty. There was no one running around, no one calling my name, no cousins nearby, no siblings standing beside me, no adults looking up. That was the first thing that felt wrong. At 7 years old, you do not always question things clearly. You do not stop and think, how did I get here? Or why is everyone gone? Instead, you feel something change before your mind catches up. I remember looking down from the edge. The ground below seemed farther away than it should have. The grass looked small. The sharp rocks near the base of the platform looked darker against the dirt. I remember feeling uneasy, though I did not know why. Then I felt cold. It was not a normal breeze. The afternoon had been warm, and the sun was still shining brightly. But suddenly, the air around me seemed to drop in temperature. I felt the cold run over my arms and down my back. It was like standing outside on a warm day and having someone open a freezer door behind you. I froze. For a moment, I thought maybe someone had come up behind me. Maybe one of my cousins was trying to scare me. Maybe a sibling had snuck up without making a sound. Kids do things like that. They push, joke, grab each other's shoulders, and then run away laughing. But I did not hear anyone. There were no footsteps, no giggling, no voice, nothing. Then I felt a hard push between my shoulder blades. It was strong, not a small bump, not the kind of accidental contact that happens when someone brushes past you. It felt like someone had placed both hands on my back and shoved me forward with purpose. I had no time to catch myself. I had no time to turn around. I had no time to scream. 1 second I was standing at the edge of the platform. The next, I was falling. I remember the feeling of the ground rushing upward. I remember a sudden rush of air. I remember my stomach dropping in that horrible way it does when you fall unexpectedly. Then I hit the ground. The impact knocked the breath out of me. For a moment, I could not understand what had happened. Everything felt distant and unreal. My head hurt. My body hurt. The bright afternoon sunlight felt too harsh. I could hear sounds around me, but they seemed far away, muffled as if I were underwater. Then I realized I was bleeding. I had hit a sharp rock when I fell. I do not remember seeing the blood immediately, but I remember the pain and the strange warm feeling around my head. I remember trying to move and not knowing whether I could. I remember being confused, hurt, and terrified, all at once. But before anyone found me, I looked back up toward the platform. That was when I saw the figure. At first, it was standing above me. It looked like the shape of a child, not a normal child standing in sunlight. It was black, not like someone wearing dark clothes, not like a person standing in shadow. The figure itself seemed dark, like a solid shadow had taken the shape of a child. The sun was still bright. The platform was still lit by daylight. There should not have been a dark figure standing there. There was nothing behind it to create that kind of shadow. No wall, no tree, no object blocking the light. But it was there. It stood at the edge of the platform, looking down at me. I remember being unable to look away. I was already hurt. I was already scared. I did not understand why I had fallen. But seeing that black shape standing above me made the fear become something else. It was not just fear of being injured. It was fear that I had not fallen by accident. The figure began moving. It did not run. It did not jump down. It somehow came toward me. I do not remember seeing it climb down the normal way. I only remember that suddenly it was close to me, close enough that I could see its face. It was the face of a child. Or at least, it looked like one. The figure was dark, but the face was clear enough for me to understand what I was looking at. It was staring directly at me, and it looked terrified. It was crying. Not loudly, not screaming, just crying in a way that felt full of pain and fear. That was what confused me most. I expected something that pushed me to be angry or cruel. I expected it to look threatening. But the figure did not look happy that I had fallen. It looked scared. It looked like it was suffering. It looked like it had seen something terrible. For a few seconds, it stayed right in front of me. I remember its face being close to mine. I remember feeling like it wanted to say something, but it never spoke. There was no sound, no whisper, no name, no explanation. Only those dark eyes and the expression of fear on its face. Then it turned away. I watched it walk back toward the stairs that led down from the platform. It moved away slowly, still shaped like a child, still dark against the bright afternoon around us. It went toward the stairs. Then it vanished. It did not run into the house. It did not disappear behind a wall. It did not go around a corner where I could no longer see it. It simply was not there anymore. One moment, I was watching it move away. The next, there was nothing. Just the stairs, just the bright sun, just the platform above me. I do not know how long I lay there afterward. It may have only been a few minutes, but it felt much longer. I remember being in pain and unable to cry properly. I remember feeling strangely quiet, almost frozen. I was scared, but the fear was so large that I could not even react the way I normally would. Eventually, someone found me. I do not remember who first saw me. It may have been one of my cousins, one of my siblings, or an adult from inside the house. I only remember that suddenly people were around me. Voices became loud. Someone was calling for help. Someone was asking me what happened. Someone was trying to keep me still. My head was covered in blood. I was crying, but silently. That detail has always stayed with me. I was not screaming. I was not panicking loudly. I was just sitting there, hurt and shaking, with tears coming down my face. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe I was too scared to make noise. Maybe some part of me was still watching the stairs, expecting that dark child to come back. The adults did not understand what had happened at first. They probably thought I had climbed too close to the edge and fallen. Maybe they thought I slipped. Maybe they assumed I had been playing too close to the platform and lost my balance. I do not remember whether I told them immediately that I had been pushed. I may have been too young to explain it properly. I may have said someone pushed me, and people may have assumed another child had done it. Or maybe I was too frightened to say anything at all. I only know that I remembered the cold, the hard shove, the fall, and the black child standing over me. I was taken to a doctor. The doctor said I had been very lucky. I had hit a sharp rock, and the injury could have been much worse. I was told later that I had been only centimeters from dying. If I had fallen differently, if my head had hit slightly higher or lower, or if the rock had been in a different position, I might not have survived. At 7 years old, I did not fully understand what that meant. I knew I had gotten hurt badly. I knew people were scared. I knew my parents were upset. But the idea of being close to death was too big for me to process. It felt like something that happened in movies or to other people, not to a kid who had only been playing outside at a family gathering. For years afterward, I remembered the fall. I remembered the platform. I remembered the sensation of being pushed. And I remembered the black figure. But I did not know what it was. I tried to make sense of it as I got older. Maybe another child pushed me and ran away. Maybe I had fallen on my own and my brain created the feeling of being pushed because I did not remember losing my balance. Maybe I saw a shadow after I hit my head. Maybe I had been injured badly enough that I hallucinated. Those explanations were possible. I know that a head injury can affect memory. I know trauma can make things feel distorted. I know children can misunderstand events, especially when they are scared. But there was one thing I could never explain. The figure looked like a child, not just any child. A few years ago, I found out something about that platform that I had never known. Another child had fallen from the exact same spot. It happened almost exactly a year before my fall. The child was around my age. They had apparently been in the same area, near the same raised platform, and had fallen in almost the same way. They hit the same sharp rock that I did. But they did not survive. The child died. From what I was told, it happened almost exactly 1 year before I fell. And it happened on that child's birthday. When I first heard that, I did not know how to react. I think I expected the story to make me feel something clear. Fear, sadness, relief, anything. Instead, I just felt numb. Because suddenly, the memory of the black figure did not feel like a random image from a scared child's mind anymore. It felt connected. The timing was too strange. The location was too exact. The rock was the same. The fall was the same. The child was around my age. And then, my parents sent me a picture of the child. I stared at it for a long time. It was the figure I had seen, or at least it was the closest thing I had ever seen to it. The face in the picture matched the face that had stood over me after I fell. The dark shadow I remembered had not been clear enough for me to identify at the time, but the features were familiar. The shape of the face, the age, the expression that had seemed so frightened. It was the child who had died there, the child I believed had pushed me. That is the part I still do not know how to understand. Why would a dead child push someone from the same place where they died? Was it angry? Was it repeating what happened to it? Was it trying to make me experience the same fall? Or was it trying to warn me somehow? Maybe the push was not meant to kill me. Maybe it was meant to get my attention. Maybe it was trying to show me what happened. But that is hard to believe when the fall nearly killed me. The figure was crying. That is what I keep coming back to. It did not look cruel. It did not look pleased. It looked terrified. It looked like it was trapped in the worst moment of its life. Maybe it did not understand what it was doing. Maybe it did not know I would fall so badly. Maybe whatever happened on that platform had left something behind. Something that repeated itself every year, or whenever another child stood too close to the edge. I do not know. Maybe I am trying too hard to connect things that should not be connected. Maybe I only saw the picture after years of carrying the memory, and my mind made the face fit, because I wanted an answer. Maybe the black figure was only a hallucination caused by pain and shock. Maybe the feeling of being pushed was only my body reacting to a slip or loss of balance. Those explanations are possible. But I remember the cold. I remember the shove. I remember the way it felt like someone was standing directly behind me. And I remember looking up after I hit the ground and seeing a child-shaped shadow watching me from the platform. I remember it coming close to me. I remember its crying face. I remember it turning and walking back toward the stairs before vanishing in the middle of a bright afternoon. For years, I thought the scariest part of the story was how close I came to dying. I thought the scariest part was the blood, the sharp rock, and the fall from a platform with no railings. But finding out about the other child changed everything. Because suddenly, It felt like I had not simply had an accident. It felt like I had stepped into someone else's tragedy. Something had happened there before me. Something had left a mark. And whether it was a ghost, a memory, a coincidence, or a terrified child's imagination, I will never forget the feeling of being pushed from behind by someone I could not see. When I was younger, around 5 years old, I had recurring dreams. They were not always nightmares exactly. Some of them were strange, some felt sad, and some were so ordinary that they would not have meant anything to anyone else. But they came back again and again, every few days, almost like my mind was replaying the same short scenes on a loop. Most of the dreams from that age have faded over time. I remember pieces of them, feelings more than details. I remember being afraid of certain rooms, certain shadows, and certain sounds, but one dream stayed with me much more clearly than the others. It was not scary. That was the strange part. There was no monster in it. No one chased me. Nobody got hurt. Nothing jumped out at me. It was just a simple, quiet scene that repeated itself so many times that it became familiar. In the dream, I was walking toward a house. The house sat in front of a hill. It was not a huge hill or a mountain. It was more of a grassy slope rising behind the house, with enough height to make the building stand out against it. The road in front of the house was quiet. There were no cars passing, no other people walking nearby. It felt like the house was somewhere rural, far away from the kind of neighborhood I knew as a child. I would walk up to the front door. Then I would knock. Someone would answer, though I do not always remember seeing their face clearly. In some versions of the dream, I only remember a woman's voice. In others, I remember the door opening and someone standing there. But their face was never the important part. I would ask if I could have some wood for a campfire. The person would tell me to take it from the driveway. Then I would walk over to the side of the house, where there was a pile of firewood. I would gather some of it, or at least look at it, and then I would leave. That was the entire dream. House, hill, driveway, firewood, then walking away. It was so simple that I never understood why it came back so often. As a kid, I did not question it much. Children accept dreams in a way adults usually do not. You can dream about something completely random, wake up and move on with your day without trying to find a reason for it. The dream would happen, I would wake up, and eventually I would forget about it until it came again a few days later. But because it repeated, certain details became fixed in my mind. I remembered the front of the house. I remembered the slope behind it. I remembered the driveway. I remembered the wood stacked there. I remembered the feeling of walking up to the door, knocking, and asking for something that felt important in the dream, even though it was only firewood. The house did not feel like my home. It did not look like anything near where I lived in Canada. It had a different kind of atmosphere. The road seemed narrower. The land around it felt older. The house itself had a style that did not match the homes I was used to seeing, though when I was 5, I could not have explained that clearly. I only knew it was not a place I recognized from real life. For a while, I had the dream every few days. Sometimes the details changed a little. The light outside might be different. Sometimes it seemed like late afternoon with pale sunlight on the hill. Sometimes it was overcast. Sometimes the house looked empty until I knocked. Sometimes I could hear distant voices or birds, but there was never anything threatening. The main part never changed. I always went to that house. I always asked for firewood. I always found it in the driveway. I always left. Then, eventually, the dreams stopped. They did not end with anything dramatic. There was no final version where something happened. There was no moment where I realized what the dream meant. I simply stopped having it. As I got older, I forgot about it. Not completely, but enough that it became one of those strange little memories from childhood that only appears once in a while. Maybe I would think about it after seeing a house on a hill or a stack of wood near someone's driveway. Maybe I would remember the general idea of it without being able to picture every detail. By the time I was a teenager, I barely thought about it at all. Then, when I was 14, I went on a trip to Europe. I live in Canada, and it was my first time traveling there. At that age, going to Europe felt enormous. It was not just a vacation. It felt like entering a completely different world. The cities, roads, houses, languages, food, and landscapes all seemed unfamiliar compared to what I knew at home. I went as part of a camp program. The camp was doing a trip that involved traveling down a river by boat for a week. It was the kind of trip where you had to carry what you needed, work with the people in your group, help set up camp, and get used to being outside for long stretches of time. It was exciting, but it was also exhausting. For a week, we traveled along the river, stopping at different places to rest, eat, and set up camp. There were long days of being on the water, paddling, carrying gear, and trying to stay organized. By the end of the week, everyone was tired in the way people get tired after spending days outside. Your clothes smell like smoke and river water. Your arms are sore. Your shoes are never completely dry. You start to miss ordinary things like a real shower, a bed, and a warm room. But it was still a good experience. The river passed through places that looked completely different from home. There were stretches of open land, sections lined with trees, small roads disappearing into the distance, and occasional houses that seemed isolated from everything else. After the week on the river was over, we settled in a clear area to camp. We needed firewood. I do not remember exactly how we decided who would go. It may have been that the counselors split us into small groups and told us to look for wood nearby. It may have been that a few of us volunteered because we were tired of sitting around and wanted to do something useful. Either way, I ended up being part of the group sent to find firewood. At first, we tried to look around the area where we had set up camp. There were branches and bits of wood nearby, but not enough. The ground around us had probably already been picked through, and most of the wood we found was either too wet, too small, or too rotten to burn properly. We walked farther out. There was a road near where we had settled, and we followed it for a while. We were supposed to be looking for fallen branches or some place where we could gather enough wood without causing problems. But after a while, we got lazy. We were teenagers. We had already spent a week outdoors. We did not want to drag wet branches back to camp or search the woods for another hour. We wanted an easy solution. So when we found a few houses in the middle of nowhere, someone suggested asking if they had spare firewood. It did not seem like a bad idea at the time. There were no stores nearby. We were in a rural area. People in places like that often had wood stacked outside their homes. It seemed possible that someone would be willing to give a group of tired campers a few pieces for a fire. We kept following the road. The houses were spread out, with space between them. The scenery was quiet. There were fields, trees, and low hills around us. It did not look like a place where many people passed through. The road itself felt older and narrower than roads back home, and the houses seemed built differently from the ones I knew in Canada. At first, I was only thinking about getting firewood. Then I started to feel strange. Not scared, just strange. It began as a feeling that I had seen the area before. That is not unusual on its own. Sometimes a place reminds you of somewhere else. A road can look like a road from your hometown. A hill can look like another hill. A house can resemble something you have passed before. But this did not feel like that. It felt more specific. As we walked, I noticed a hill in the distance behind one of the houses. The shape of it made something in my mind tighten. I slowed down. The others kept talking, but I was suddenly paying close attention to everything around me. The road, the grass, the way the house sat in front of the hill, the space near the driveway. I had seen it before, or at least I felt like I had. At first, I told myself it was just familiar-looking scenery. I had been on the river for a week, surrounded by hills and rural land. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was starting to see patterns because we had been walking for a while. But the closer we got, the stronger the feeling became. The house in front of the hill looked exactly like the house from my childhood dream. Not generally similar. Not kind of like it. It looked right. The shape of the building, the placement of the front door, the slope behind it, the driveway. Even the feeling of the place seemed familiar. I remember standing there with the others while my mind tried to catch up. For a moment, I did not say anything. I think part of me did not want to mention it because it sounded ridiculous. How could I tell a group of people that I had dreamed about this exact house when I was 5 years old? How could I explain that I had been having the same dream every few days as a child, then somehow ended up standing in front of that location years later in another country? I could barely explain it to myself. But I knew what I remembered. I had walked toward this house in my dream. I had knocked on this door. I had asked for firewood. I had been told to get it from the driveway. It was too exact. I felt like I had stepped into a memory that did not belong to my real life. The others were not thinking about any of that. They just wanted wood. Someone walked up to the house, or maybe I did. I cannot remember exactly which of us first approached the door, because by then I was so distracted by the feeling of recognition that everything seemed unreal. But I know I ended up at the door. I knocked. The door opened. A woman answered, and we asked if we could have some firewood. I remember trying to watch her face and the doorway at the same time, almost waiting for her to say something that would confirm the dream. Maybe I expected her to recognize me. Maybe I expected the moment to become obviously strange. But she was just a normal woman answering the door. She listened to what we asked. Then she pointed toward the driveway. She told us the firewood was there, the same place it had been in the dream. I remember standing there, staring toward the driveway. There was the wood, stacked exactly where I had expected it to be. I do not know whether it was arranged in the same way I remembered, because dreams are never that exact. But the location was right. The house was right. The hill was right. The driveway was right. The entire scene unfolded in the same order that it had in my recurring dream when I was 5. We gathered the wood. I probably helped carry it, though I barely remember doing so. My mind was somewhere else. I kept looking around, trying to find a difference. I wanted something to be wrong. I wanted there to be some obvious reason why the house looked familiar. Maybe there would be a sign I had seen in a photograph before. Maybe I would remember that my family had traveled through that part of Europe when I was little. Maybe one of the counselors would say something that explained it. Nothing did. It was just a house in a rural place. A woman had given us firewood. We walked away and returned to camp. For everyone else, it was probably one small part of the day. We needed wood. We found a house. Someone was kind enough to help. That was it. But for me, it felt completely different. I could not stop thinking about the dream. I remembered being 5 years old and walking toward a house in front of a hill. I remembered knocking. I remembered asking for campfire wood. I remembered being told that it was in the driveway. And then, almost 10 years later, I was 14 years old in Europe, doing exactly those things in real life. The strangest part was that it was not an important moment in my life. That is what makes it hard to understand. The dream was not about something dramatic. It was not a warning. It was not about danger. Nothing terrible happened at the house. Nothing supernatural happened once I got there. Nobody said anything mysterious. We did not discover some huge secret. It was just firewood. It was just a house. It was just a moment that should have been ordinary. But that was exactly why it unsettled me. If I had dreamed about a major event, maybe I could convince myself that it was my brain trying to prepare me for something. If I had dreamed about a specific person or a dangerous situation, maybe I could say I had been anxious or imaginative as a child. But why would a 5-year-old repeatedly dream about walking to an unfamiliar house in another part of the world to ask for firewood? Why that house? Why that hill? Why that driveway? Why that exact sequence of events? I have thought about possible explanations. Maybe the place was not as exact as it felt in the moment. Maybe many rural houses look similar. A house in front of a hill with a driveway and a firewood pile is not impossible. It could have been a coincidence, and my memory could have shaped the real place to fit the old dream. Memory is strange. You do not remember dreams perfectly, especially dreams from childhood. You remember the strongest parts, then fill in the rest over time. It is possible that I remembered the house as more exact than it really was because I was shocked by the resemblance. Maybe I had seen a picture of the area somewhere without realizing it. Maybe I had watched a documentary, looked through a magazine, seen a postcard, or passed an image on television as a child. Maybe my brain stored it away and turned it into a recurring dream. Then years later, when I saw something similar, the old memory surfaced. That is possible too, but I still cannot shake the feeling that it was more than simple familiarity. The moment I saw the hill and the house, I did not slowly recognize it. It hit me all at once. I knew. Before we knocked, before anyone mentioned firewood, before the woman came to the door, I knew exactly what was supposed to happen. And then it happened. That is what has stayed with me. Not because I think I can see the future. I do not. I have never had another dream that played out so clearly in real life. I have never predicted anything important. I do not wake up knowing things that will happen. This was the only time something from a dream seemed to appear years later in such a specific way. Maybe it was only coincidence. Maybe life sometimes puts you in a place that looks so much like an old dream that your mind connects the two and makes the similarities feel impossible. But I remember how ordinary the whole thing was. That makes it harder to dismiss. It was not a moment that should have been memorable to anyone else. It was not a huge turning point. It was just a group of tired campers looking for wood, finding a few houses, and asking a stranger for help. Yet I had been dreaming about it since I was 5. After the trip, I told people about it. Some thought it was interesting. Some probably assumed I was exaggerating. Some said it was déjà vu. Others said dreams can feel prophetic because your brain notices patterns before you consciously understand them. Maybe they are right. I do not know. I only know that there are certain places you visit for the first time and feel like you have been there before. Usually the feeling fades after a few minutes, but this did not fade. I can still picture the house. I can still picture the hill behind it. I can still picture the driveway and the pile of wood. And I can still remember being 14 years old, standing in a place I had never physically visited before, realizing that some part of me had been there a long time ago. At least in a dream. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.